Good afternoon, everyone. I'm attorney Katherine Henry. I just did a short video segment on a different topic, but I want to continue now onto the topic of courage. The source of our courage to be able to stand against the governor's illegal executive orders. And also, I want to address a little bit of something that I addressed in my speech at the rally last night in Grand Rapids, which was to some Christians who have been told that if they are true Christians, then their faith does not allow them to speak out against the governing authorities, and so they have to follow the governor and all of her executive orders. So those are two kind of related principles that I want to briefly talk about here right now. So Romans 13, in fact, does require you to submit yourself to the governing authorities. So what is a governing authority, though? Governing authorities look different in every country across the globe. But here, our government derives its powers from the consent of the governed, as emphasized in our Declaration of Independence and in many of our other founding documents. Here, authority is the right to act legally on the behalf of another person. Governments have authority for conduct that is authorized by either a constitutional provision or a statute. Our governor derives her authority to act from the enumerated powers in Article 5 of our state constitution. I'm going to pause on that note to say, for anyone who might be confused by some of these legal terms, enumerated powers means there is a list, a bullet point list, if you will, of various things that the governor is allowed to do. So Article 5 of our state constitution has various numbered paragraphs that the governor, it's describing the things that the governor is allowed to do and the ways that those things can be done. If the governor is not specifically given the power to do that, she doesn't have that power. All the power she has is derived from those enumerated powers within Section 5 of our state constitution. So, with our Constitution, it expressly prohibits the governor from creating laws. That's in Article 3, Section 2. It's actually, I believe, also in Article 4, Section 1. I'm going to double check that. Article 4, Section 1 of our state constitution says that the legislative power of the state of Michigan is vested in the Senate and a House of Representatives. So that means no one else can make laws in our state except for our legislature. So not only can she not create laws as a governor, but she can't do so in executive orders that cover more than one subject. The irony here is that you may be aware of Senate Bill 858, which passed the House and passed the Senate, and they sent it on to the governor, and she said publicly, immediately, I'm going to veto it. I have to, because it's not even constitutional. It covers more than one subject. I'm glad to know that she's reading the Constitution as it applies to the legislature, but she is neglecting the fact that if she is indeed trying to issue these executive orders to be enforced as though they are law, then she can't violate Article 4, Section 24, which says that laws cannot cover more than one subject. So she's not allowed to create laws as a person in the executive branch. And any laws that are created cannot cover more than one subject. And clearly each of these executive orders covers a variety of subjects. For example, the stay-at-home order covers things in I couldn't even tell you how many chapters of our laws they would otherwise touch on. What driving is legal, what kinds of assembly are legal, what kinds of businesses are allowed to operate, whether you're allowed to buy and sell homes, what items you're allowed to sell in stores, a variety of things. All various subjects. Also, our governor is not allowed to modify parts of laws without including the entire text of the law as amended. So that's not just for her. It's actually intended for the legislature because they're the only ones that are allowed to create laws in the first place. But nonetheless, Article 4, Section 25 says that when laws are modified, you have to essentially republish the entire law, word for word, with those changes in there. So basically, the entire text of that law being affected is reprinted, republished, so that people don't just see a teeny portion and that it's being changed and it's just referenced that the whole thing is one cohesive law. That is not done in any of these executive orders. Any of these laws she's attempting to change on her own, she is not including the entire text of each law that's being affected to show people what the new language of the entire piece would look like. Our state constitution also requires a governor to wait 90 days before enforcing new laws or legally enforceable executive orders. And that would be under Article 4, Section 27 of our state constitution. So these so far are the provisions of what the governor has been doing so far that act outside of the authority that is given in our state constitution. But it's also important to note that she's in direct violation of several statutes, including the very statutes that she cites, such as MCL 30.403, that allows her emergency powers to be exercised for a period of up to 28 days. And then if she deems the emergency needs to exist beyond that, or her emergency powers need to be exercised beyond that, the legislature has to vote to approve of any extensions. So she is clearly violating that provision of our state statutes by continuing to exercise this emergency power beyond April 30th, which was the last date the legislature provided an extension for those powers. Also, Article 4, Section 39 of our state constitution requires our state and local governments to continue their operations in periods of emergency. So, issuing any kind of executive orders that diminish governmental functions, that require government workers to stay home if they're not essential, that limits the Open Meetings Act or the Freedom of Information Act, or changes how we do elections. A lot of those, each of those three main topics I just talked about are covered in statutes that we have in our laws, but those are also essential functions of government that are supposed to continue even during times of emergency. Literally, that is the word in our state constitution, that the state and local governmental operations must continue in times of emergency. So there is definitely no authority to shut down those functions in the ways that the governor is attempting to do in these executive orders. Also, Article 11, Section 1 requires all public officers, legislators, judges, law enforcement, school board members, city council members, and even the governor, to support the U.S. Constitution and the Michigan Constitution. So the governor, police officers, or anyone else trying to enforce these executive orders are in many ways acting outside of the scope of their governmental authority. So to bring us back to Romans 13, Romans 13, verse 7 tells us to give everyone what you owe him. So if you owe taxes, pay the taxes. If you owe respect, pay respect. But we don't owe it to Gretchen Whitmer to follow her instead of following our Constitution and our laws. And since we, the people, enacted and established our state and federal constitutions, we actually owe it to each other to follow those documents, to follow the state and federal constitution. So not only do we not owe it to Gretchen Whitmer to follow the illegal and unconstitutional executive orders, but we do owe it to all other Michigan citizens and Michigan residents to follow the constitutions as they are written. But let us not forget about Isaiah 1:17, which tells us to seek justice and rebuke the oppressor. That's what people are trying to do, for the most part. There are some extreme examples where people are advocating for violence or whatever. But the majority of us who are opposing these executive orders, we're simply trying to seek justice. So the interesting thing is that we're being told this in Isaiah 1:17, where we're told to seek justice and rebuke the oppressor. We're told to do that when dealing specifically with a rebellious government. That's exactly what's happening here. We have an executive branch gone rogue. We have a governor and an attorney general and some law enforcement agencies and prosecutors across the state that have literally thrown out the state and U.S. constitutions and our state statutes. That's a rebellious government, absolutely. So Ezekiel 11, verses 1 through 4, also tells us that when the leaders of the people, that's a quote, the leaders of the people, are giving wicked advice to those in their city or those that they govern, God calls us to speak out, quote, against them, to speak the right words at the right time in the right way. So hopefully that's enough in and of itself to give you the courage and the knowledge to understand we're not advocating for something that would go against what God is calling us to do. And we're not advocating for people to violate the Constitution or to break the laws. We're advocating for quite the opposite. So there's also a couple pieces that would be important to keep in mind for trying to find courage. So there's a lot of people that have approached me, a lot of business owners, for example, across the state who said, well, I know what she's doing is wrong. I know I need to stand up and to fight these illegal executive orders. I know I should be able to open my business, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of them trying to strip my business license away. I'm afraid of the backlash I might get from people in the community. I'm afraid I might lose my long-term customers. I just want to give you some thoughts on that. A good friend of mine, Mark Petzold, has often said something that I knew was important, but it just wasn't sinking in with me. And when I actually found it in the Bible myself, I was blown away, and everything started to click into place. 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. I'm not telling you to hate Gretchen Whitmer. I'm not telling you to do a bunch of crazy stuff. I'm suggesting to you that you should not be afraid, because that is not how God designed you. Trust in the Lord to take care of you when you are doing the right thing. We have a spirit of power, of love, and of a sound mind. Follow that. Psalm 31:24 also tells us to be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart, all ye that hope in the Lord. Psalm 56:11 tells us that in God I trust, and so I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Oh, they will try. People will definitely try to come after you. But be strong. Have courage. Philippians 4:13 says that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Ezekiel 2:6, and you, son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. In fact, the remainder of that verse says that do not be afraid. Though briars and thorns are all around you and you live among scorpions, do not be afraid of what they say or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious house. I'm hoping that these words will, in fact, provide you the strength and the courage to simply follow the law, follow our statutes, and follow our Constitution. Now, if you just don't want to open your business because you feel the type of business you have or the type of clients you serve would be most at risk for some sort of dangers because of COVID-19, that is your call. You need to do what you think is right. But if you are not opening your business simply because you are afraid that the government is going to come after you or that people in your community are going to be mad at you, please set that fear aside. Please find that courage, that spirit of power and love and of a sound mind. That's all that I had to say, but it looks like we have a lot of questions about that. Oh my. If police in our county say they won't enforce the orders, but Whitmer orders state police to take a business license, can she still do that? Well, state police can't take a business license. They might serve a document. For example, I believe the barber in Owasso was served by the state police with a document drafted by the Michigan Attorney General's office in an attempt to take his license, but that's not legal. You can, just because you're refusing to follow these illegal executive orders does not give you license to then break any other requirements or restrictions upon you that might be legitimate. So, for example, if you are a bar and you are serving a 15-year-old alcohol, yeah, your license would probably be at risk there because it has nothing to do with the executive order. That's just something you should not have done. So as long as you are abiding by all the other rules and regulations that you would have done before COVID-19, simply opening your business or simply not requiring masks or any other provision of these executive orders, if you violate these executive orders and they attempt to take away your license because of that, that cannot legally stand. The orders themselves have no legal authority, so they cannot take your business license lawfully. They might appear to do so under color of law for now, but none of us are going to stop fighting until all of this is sorted out. And not a single business owner is going to be left behind in that. Has anything been done to send this to the Supreme Court? As far as I know, nothing has been filed in the U.S. Supreme Court regarding what's going on now. I could be wrong about that. But as far as our state Supreme Court, my assumption is that the party losing the decision coming out by Judge Stevens, I believe, the Court of Claims judge that is hearing the case of the legislature versus the governor's office, whoever's losing that order that's yet to be issued would probably end up appealing it to the state Supreme Court right away. I would expect that appeal to be filed within 48 hours of the judge's decision. Can Whitmer be sued for breach of contract because isn't our Constitution technically a contract? That would be an interesting way to approach it. Quite frankly, there's so many different ways that she is violating laws and constitutional provisions that I couldn't even begin to list all the different possible causes of action that someone might want to entertain in deciding if they wanted to sue the governor. Why do we have to wait for the Supreme Court ruling? She can break the law all the time, and it kills people and the economy. We don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to rule. Absolutely not. That is why I did this video segment on courage and understanding that we are meant to follow the governing authority. The governing authority is the office of governor, and it is a person exercising the enumerated powers and abiding by the restraints and other provisions of our state constitution and United States Constitution in exercising those powers. So when someone, such as Governor Whitmer, goes above and beyond and tries to exercise powers that she does not have, tries to do things that specifically violate the restraints upon that government action as written in our Constitution, she is stepping way beyond that governmental authority. And we don't have to sit around and wait for a court to tell us that. We have the Constitution. We have the statutes. They're there. Those are not meant for attorneys and judges to read and argue about. The Constitution is a document that cements that our whole government is a government by the people, that we the people collectively came together and we instituted this form of government. And we placed significant restrictions upon government officials in attempting to regulate us and how we live our lives. So do we need to wait for a judge to tell us that all these actions are unconstitutional? No. Open your businesses now. That's exactly what is allowed under Romans 13, because they are the ones stepping outside of the governmental authority. And that's also why we need to focus on exercising the courage and setting aside the fear about doing this. So don't wait for the Supreme Court. Did you get your rights from the Supreme Court? I got my rights from God. And every other person in Michigan had their rights cemented by the establishment of this Constitution. It's written so in our very preamble. Well, there's a question about the Bible talking about obeying the laws of the land. If you wanted to send me a particular biblical passage to look at, I can certainly do that, but it certainly doesn't tell us to blindly follow the laws of the land. Here's an example. If the law of the land says, if we enacted a statute that says, you can kill anyone as long as you're mad at them. If you're mad at them, go ahead and just kill them. That's fine. Clearly, God would not be out like, hey, go ahead. It's the law of the land. Go ahead and follow it. So that's what I'm getting at when I talk about when Romans 13 is directing us to obey governmental authority. The authority put into place, first of all, cannot violate God's law. But the individuals trying to exercise that authority, we're only required to obey them within the framework of that authority. And that doesn't go, those biblical passages don't go into specifics about how that works in a republican form of government, because it wasn't around. That's not the type of system that was in place. In fact, I believe that provision ends up talking about the emperor. Well, an emperor definitely has a totally different system of governmental powers than a governor in Michigan, and set up in the United States. So hopefully one last question, because I do have a group of people that will be waiting for me in a conference call to explain some of these very changes in just a few moments here. The question is, can law enforcement officers be held liable for following illegal orders causing damages? Yes, absolutely. That is why we need to educate our fellow police officers and sheriff's deputies and state police officers and city attorneys and prosecuting attorneys. Absolutely. The concept of malicious prosecution is a state concept that we have both in common law and in our statutes that basically say not only would you be able to sue an individual who is attempting to restrict your rights and enforce these illegal executive orders, that not only can you have a civil cause of action with, I believe, up to treble damages, 3 times the amount, you can also get attorney's fees, and there's also criminal provisions out of that. It's in Chapter 600. I don't remember the exact statute right now, but definitely there are civil and criminal things that individual officers, individual prosecutors will be facing if they're going to try to enforce these illegal executive orders. Absolutely. So let's try to work together to help educate them so they don't go down that road. Try to have firm but kind conversations with these individuals and show them the law, show them the Constitution, and ask them to read it for themselves. And also abusive process, and that's more of a state common law cause of action against these individuals trying to enforce these illegal executive orders. Also, we have additional federal statutes on point. I believe 18 U.S.C. Section 242, 18 U.S.C. Section 241 would be some of them, 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. I could be a little bit off about some of those citations, but those, I believe, are 3 federal statutes on point that you would want to look at and think about. If you're a law enforcement officer and you think you should be enforcing these executive orders, please take a look at those federal statutes as well. Know what you're up against. Know what you're putting yourself into by doing so. And there's a question that I think is a lot more philosophical in nature about Jesus kicking over the table in the temple with the tax collectors. Unfortunately, that's not a quick answer, and I have less than 3 minutes to get on to this conference call to help people sort through these legal issues. I do plan to do at least one other video later today, short videos. This was probably the longest one of all of them today. But hopefully I've been able to answer your questions and to indeed provide you that courage to do what is right and to follow the law. And as always, if you have additional questions, I will try to keep up with those that are posted to my Facebook page or to, sent to me in emails or whatnot. So check back later for more information. Thanks, guys.